Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you. So today I wanted to tell you a little bit about what it was like when I was growing up. My parents divorced when I was about 2 years old, and there was a lot of conflict in my family, especially between my parents. They never got along, and honestly, they used each other as weapons and they used us kids as weapons against each other. And one of the things that I realized from a young age was that there are a lot of shortcomings and things that were done wrong in the way that I was raised by, in particular by both by my mother and father, but in particular on the part of my father. There was a lot of resentment, there was a lot of anger, and there was a lot of things that I had wished would happen but didn't. There were things that I wished that I had the opportunity to do that I didn't. So, because my parents divorced when I was so young, I wasn't raised with my father, I was raised by my mother. And I never really developed a close relationship with my father as I was growing up. And a part of me really resented the fact that we weren't as close as we could have been. My older brother and sister had many more years living with my father than I did. And I also came to realize at a very young age there were a lot of character flaws, character faults. Of course, everybody has them, but there were very noticeable ones in my father. And I remember going through life and getting, difficult communication, difficult ideas, and a lot of bad, I guess, just to put it bluntly, a lot of bad treatment, right? There was a lot of things like, as a diabetic, I needed to be able to take insulin and eat healthy. And my father would always say, Omar, you're only young once. Go ahead and enjoy the sweets and eat whatever candies you want. And that's not very good advice to give a diabetic child. Other examples, things like, don't take your medicine, you don't need it, you can do without it. And it's like, no, I do need it. But based on those negative messages, it ended up not being so healthy. One of the other things that often happened was that when I was looking for wisdom, when I was looking for emotional support, when I was looking for help in my life, my father was not able. Not only was he not able to give me beneficial advice, he was not emotionally around to be able to provide that sage wisdom and that sort of being a rock to lean on. And I realized ultimately my father didn't decide to divorce, it was initiated on the other side. But really, I realized that although there were many difficulties in our relationship, there was one period at which I had come to a very distinct moment of transition. It was in Muharram. It was, I think, Ashura. I don't remember what year, maybe 3, 4 years ago, 5 years ago. And there was a particular lecture about orphans and about the fact that being an orphan is such a devastating reality, both in history, but even if you look at today's, in the aftermath of the Iraq War, in the aftermath of all of the wars around the world, there are so many orphans left behind. And in that moment of mourning, in that moment of recognition of how much devastation there is around the world, I came to the realization that at this point, both my mother and father are still alive. I am not yet an orphan. And I realized that if I was going to change the way that I interacted with my father, I had to do it now while he's still here. I wanted to do it now while he's still here. You can build together the pieces even after someone goes away, but it's so much more, it's such a better opportunity to make peace with someone when they still have the opportunity to connect. And so in listening to that lecture, in realizing the depth of being an orphan and how tragic it must be to not be able to turn back the clock, I said, you know what, I need to put this behind me. And even before that lecture, I heard that lecture, I had realized that my father does love me, does care about me, does want what's best for me, but he has a funny way of showing it. And one of the things that I knew growing up was my father always wanted to spend time with me. He always invited me to visit him, although we weren't able to do it very often. When I would visit, there would be toxic interactions, there would be negative comments made, there would be a lot of destructive things happening. But at the end of the day, he was doing the best that he could. And it was that realization that although he was an imperfect man, as we all are imperfect humans, he was doing the best that he can, and the harm that was coming from his hand and his tongue were things that were not done out of malicious intent, but they were done from a place of love manifesting in a very destructive way. And I realized that I have to consider the people in my life around me who are hurting me unintentionally, that ultimately they are hurting me not out of malice or ill intent, but out of almost, as in a word, being sick. You know, if you're a sick person, then when you do someone harm, you're not doing it out of ill intent. You're just doing it because you don't have a better way. And I'm sure you've all heard the quote, hurt people hurt people, right? So people who are hurting are the ones who hurt others. And ultimately, I made peace with the fact that although my father was not the best in many ways, he was not what I hoped for in some respects. He was not, compatible to my friends' parents who I knew growing up or even in my adult life. At the end of the day, he was doing the best that he could. And when I was able to forgive his shortcomings and truly let go of the pain that I suffered at his hand and rather appreciate the good that he was attempting to do, that forgiveness was something that I did for myself, and it radically transformed our relationship. So as I have gotten older and closer to my father in my adult life, I realized that we do have sometimes, odd exchanges or things that are not necessarily positive. But the fact that I was able to forgive made it possible for me to enjoy the relationship, flawed as it may be, in a much more wholesome and healthy way. And what I realized is that forgiveness is not something that we do for the other person. Rather, forgiveness is something that we do for our own selves. Now you may be wondering, well, what is forgiveness anyway? Is it forgetting? Is it ignoring? Is it glossing over the fact that damage was done? No. Forgiveness is the process of grieving the pain that someone else or some other situation caused you. So it's accepting that pain, acknowledging that pain, recognizing that pain, experiencing it, and then resolving it, letting it go. Mourning, grieving the loss, like we've been talking about in the last couple of videos, and then allowing it to be at peace. And it's something that you're doing to be able to connect with people or not connect, right? You don't have to necessarily connect with the people that you're forgiving. But when you do forgive, you find that there is less emotional damage, less emotional stress, and less anguish when you interact with that same person. So for example, I can have conversations with my father, and I can have all sorts of, I can visit him every year, and we do all these things around Thanksgiving, and we have an ongoing relationship now. And I don't feel anguish. I don't feel stress. I don't feel miserable in his company anymore. I made peace with the harms that were done. I forgave the fact that he did the best that he could, but the best that he could do just wasn't that good. And I realized that ultimately, if I hold on to anger and don't resolve it, and I hold a grudge, that unspoken resentment will harm me, not him. And it makes me suffer, not him. So one of the quotes that I really enjoy is, unspoken resentment is like drinking poison and hoping the other person dies. There's something about us as human beings that we wish that the people who hurt us will experience pain because of the pain that they inflicted upon us. And it's only, it's what you would call tabi'ah, right? It's our animalistic nature. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, right? But the reality is that inflicting pain on someone else doesn't make us feel any better. but rather experiencing the pain, experiencing the loss, coming to terms with it, and then forgiving the person and letting go of that anger at them allows us to live a healthier life. Now, I'm not saying don't prevent yourself or protect yourself if you've been harmed by someone or are continually being harmed by somebody, to allow that abuse and that neglect to continue. That's not what I'm saying. If there's someone who's a hostile person, you might need to minimize contact and all those other things. But forgiveness is not about the other person at all or what they've done. Forgiveness is something that I do for myself in order to understand and accept and move through the pain that I have felt at someone else's hand. And it's about letting go of my pain and my attachment to that pain, letting it go, transitioning forward. And it allows, if there is possibility for a healthy relationship to come afterwards, it produces a conducive environment for it. Now, I want to share an interesting story. So I have siblings, and one of my siblings was telling me, Omar, every time I deal with Dad, it's this way and it's that way, and I never want to go, and I hate going, and I know I have to go because Islam says I have to go, but I don't want to do it, and it's miserable, and I only do it because I have to. How anguish-filled is that kind of a relationship, where you're putting yourself in contact with someone, expecting no benefit, having no hope for a beneficial contact, having no hope for positivity at all, but you're, subjecting yourself to interacting with someone who you really don't want to be around. That's unspoken resentment. That's lack of forgiveness. And that is a source of anguish for that family member. But for me, because I was able to forgive my father, I am able to interact with him in a healthier, more positive way. So much so that I actually enjoy our interactions now. Now, am I going to him for my big life advice and how to live my life? Probably not. But I am appreciative of the fact that he's putting forth an energy to connect with me, and I'm putting forth an energy to connect with him. There are so many times that we've been harmed in our lives, intentionally and unintentionally. And if we hold on to all of that anger, all of that unspoken resentment, it is literally like consuming buckets upon buckets of poison. How much poison do you want to eat? How much suffering are you putting on yourself? We have an option to let it go, and we let it go by forgiving, not by allowing ourselves to be abused in the future, but simply by making peace with the harms that have done, understanding the capacity of the people who are harming us, and understanding that there are some things that are done that are not intentional, even though they're damaging, and that we have to hope that the person heals in order to continue on the path in a healthier way. And if they don't, that's their choice. It's not my choice. I'm not responsible for what anybody else does or doesn't do. I'm only responsible, and God will only hold me to account for the decisions I make and the way that I live my life. And so, again, this quote, unspoken resentment is like consuming poison and hoping the other person dies. Not forgiving someone is not doing them any harm, and it's not giving you any relief. So I want to talk a little bit about how we can come to the point of forgiveness. In the case of someone who was doing damage unintentionally, right? The benefit is, obviously, they didn't intend you harm. But what about for people who have intended you harm? There are people in the world, and I'm going to just throw it out there. There are evil people who have malicious intent and who intend on doing damage. Should we not forgive those people because they're evil and inclined towards evil and acting out of evil? Again, the same is true. Forgiveness is not for the other person. It's for your own self and for your own peace of mind, peace of heart, and again, a cure, a potent cure. So even when someone has evil intent or negative intent, the way that you can approach forgiveness is, number one, trying to understand why they may have done what they have done, understanding the history of where they're coming from and what may have happened and gone on, and understanding that they are a human who is exposed to pain and suffering, and probably didn't have the best outcome or the best advice or the best way. All of these things, all of us are sort of in this human life together. And we all have people that we struggle with. We all have challenges. And some of us make maladaptive choices. Some of us made more negative choices than others. And some of us, honestly, one of the things that I'm reminded of is the idea of the difference between being unable and being unwilling. There are some people in the world who are unwilling to do better. But there are the vast majority of people, I think if you do an honest assessment of the world, most people who harm other people are not unwilling to do better. They're simply unable. They don't have the knowledge. They don't have the resources. They don't have the ability to heal themselves or those around them. They've had bad instruction. Think about our corrupt society and think about how the world that we live in is so very sick. Living in a sick world has damage. It has effects. So many people are struggling to do well and to do the right thing, but they're simply unable to do better. And if you have a choice to condemn someone as either unwilling or unable, why don't we assume the best, that they're trying to do better, but they're simply incapable of doing it? That feeling, again, this is that idea of making meaning out of things, like we make choices about what beliefs we believe. Believing that someone is unable allows us the freedom to not condemn them for their intention. Who knows their intention other than God? God is the only one who knows what's in our hearts. God is the only one who knows. But if I hold on to the belief that they were simply unwilling to do better and they're doing this to spite me, does that serve me? Does that help me in any way? No, it makes me increase in suffering. But by believing that this person is doing the best that they can, they had a lot of difficulties, they had a lot of hardships, they had their own problems. Ultimately, forgiveness does not lead, me forgiving that other person doesn't lead to God forgiving that other person, right? God is going to hold us all to account based on what we were and weren't able to do. That's not a question at all. But the idea of forgiveness is that you let go of your own turmoil, your own suffering, and releasing it back into the universe so that you don't have to hold it anymore. There was a scholar who once said, if you ask someone, we need a plan. A lot of us are big in planning and having 10-year plans and whatever at work and other places. And he said, do you need a project plan? If somebody asks you, there's something on your back and it's so heavy, how do I get it off? You don't need a project plan. You just need to get it off your back. If you're holding a hot coal in your hand and it's burning your hand, you don't need a project plan to let it go. You just let it go. There's nothing to it but that. And the same thing can be said about forgiveness. It's not a radical idea. It's not a tremendous, I won't forgive them until they apologize. I won't forgive them until they tell me all the things that they did that were wrong. I won't forgive them until this and this and this. No, you're holding a burning coal in your hand. Who are you hurting? I'm hurting myself by holding it. I just need to let it go. Ultimately, the judge and the master of the universe will judge. That's his job. That's not my job. And I don't have the authority or the ability to do it. So let it go. Being able to forgive opens up doors of peace and relief. And I wanted to share actually, not a direct quote, but a paraphrase. There is a dua in Sahifa Sajjadiyya, the book of Imam Zain al-Abidin, Imam al-Sajjad. And he said in the dua for parents, something along the lines of, oh my God, if my parents have done evil towards me or harmed me in any way or been ungrateful to me or, not caring for me in the proper way, or they neglected my responsibilities, or they didn't take care of me the way that they should have, I ask you to forgive them for it, let it go, take it off of their account, and let them be at peace because of it. I don't hold any enmity against them for the shortcomings in the way that they raised me. And if I have been immoderate towards them, and I have treated them unjustly, and I have burdened them, and I have hurt them, then allow that to be an expiation of their sins. This idea of even if our parents aren't perfect, right? if we can let go of what they did wrong and appreciate whatever they have done that is good, even if it's very small. I think that's another line in that same dua, oh God, allow me to consider my own goodness to them as small, though it be great. And allow me to consider their good towards me as great, even if it's small. This is not done, these words are not encouraged in order to make us, denigrate ourselves or oppress ourselves. No, this is for our benefit. Because by seeing our own injustices against them as great, even if they're small, it makes us careful not to do more harm to them. And if we see their contributions as great, even if it's small, we learn to be grateful for the good in others. And it helps us to align our minds so that we see clearly and are able to live a healthy, happy life. Forgiveness is a cure for so many things. And again, it doesn't mean subjecting yourself to more pain. It doesn't mean that. But what it does mean is letting go of the anguish, the emotional, mental, physical, even physiological damage from holding on to unspoken resentment. So this is one of the things that I think is so helpful, to be able to forgive the people and look back in your life and say, well, who has done me harm and who am I holding a grudge against? And how can I move towards forgiveness? Now, I want to be honest with you. There are still people in my life that I'm working on forgiving. There are still people that it's a challenge to be able to do. And it takes time and commitment and understanding and peace, right? I'm not saying that it's easy. I am saying that it's beneficial. And I am saying that it can be done. So I hope that you find the space and the ability in your life, no matter who has harmed you, how they've harmed you, why they've harmed you, that you can find it in your heart to forgive them. And inshallah, be forgiven by those that we have harmed. So I wanted to share that, and I guess we'll talk again soon. Assalamu alaikum, and upon you be peace.